Hi, I'm Mark Edwards, and welcome to Musical Differences, a podcast, a conversation, a chat between friends who will discuss their musical interests, their musical obsessions, and their musical differences too. In this episode, I'm joined by Andrew Nutt, or Andy Nutt, or Nutty, an old friend from back in the day in Gorseinon in South Wales. Andy now lives in Perth in Australia, and I really enjoyed this chat with him, catching up on old times and our musical differences. Enjoy. Well, look, clearly we're itching to get on to the topic here. So I said we were relaxing, late night listening to music. I'm going to, first of all, let's just kind of tell the viewers, you're Andrew Nutt, Andy Nutt, Nutty. I don't think I ever called you Nutty, but I think that's...
Thank you, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you. But back from Gorseinon in South Wales, but living now in Perth, Australia. Where I said there's so much you could tell us. We chatted the other day online. I haven't spoken to you for many years, and it was lovely to catch up on all that stuff. But our focus here today, this is the Musical Differences podcast, where we're going to talk about our musical interests, musical obsessions, and some likely musical differences as well. My guess is there's going to be some music that you like or love, even that I'm pretty sure that I might not like or love, but let's see where we go. We're similar in age. That's as most of the guests so far on this podcast have been. So there's lots of similarities, but I'm going to kick off with some lyrics just to evoke something that I think will probably touch you more than it touches me. But the screen door slams, Mary's dress sways like a vision. She dances across the porch as the radio plays. Roy Orbison singing for the lonely. Hey, that's me, and I want you only. Don't turn me home again. I just can't face. Super. But I said, what I kind of kick things off, I said, not necessarily the first. We'll get to what was the first record you bought, or even the first piece of music you may have heard. But I'm just intrigued by what kind of memories do you have, probably from your youth, but not necessarily, as I said, from your very early youth, but that have been, you can kind of, that evoke a piece of music that's just kind of imprinted in your mind because of some scene, something, some setting you were in, some circumstance. Does anything come to mind?
Absolutely. Look, we'll skip the rattle and the tin drum because we all had one of those. Probably the first thing I heard. Growing up in Wales, an industrial town, you find yourself surrounded by an ambience that can be quite somber, particularly when it came to the fact that I had to go to a Baptist chapel when I was younger. So I did hear
which one was that? Where was that?
I went to Zion Chapel in High Street.
Right, okay, I know it.
So it was mainly Sunday school. Yes. Sunday afternoon, our parents would send us off. And I think the main objective was probably to get a bit of peace and quiet, especially when I was around. I tend to talk a lot. So the environment I grew up in was quite dark. I joke about it that we grew up in a black and white environment, and everything seemed to be in black and white. There were collieries,
grey down there, wasn't it?
Yeah. So anytime I got to see color was a bit of a thrill to me. And I can remember going to school and being taken to the Odeon Cinema in Swansea to see the Black Theatre of Prague.
What's that? I've never even heard of it. That's a movie.
Yeah, well, it's sort of a puppet show.
All right.
And the whole stage is blacked out. So these mannequins run around with different colored shapes and puppets, which are luminous. So the way the lighting display worked was it would illuminate the colors of what they were carrying, but not the mannequins.
Yes.
So it appeared as if these things were jumping around on the stage by magic.
Right.
And being Russian, they or Czechoslovakian or whatever they were, they played Prokofiev.
Right.
So I'm digressing slightly,
Well, no,
but
but it's important. Clearly, clearly. I'm just trying to think. What is is one a famous? I would know the tune, I'm sure, but I can't off the top of my head. Can you even hum it?
no, I can't even remember it. But I knew it was Prokofiev, and I knew it
Yeah.
created a sort of impression on me. So maybe that started the catalyst for some of the music, the atmospheric music that I would like later in life.
Well, you mentioned Zion Church there as well. If that's the one in the High Street opposite Argyle Park, as I think it is,
No, it's
ah,
actually the one that's just next to Brighton Road.
on the High Street. All right, okay,
On
I know
road,
where you are. I know where you are. I know where you are. Yes,
yeah.
yes. I thought it was a laundry, or there might be a laundry nearby
No, the
there.
laundry was on the other side. Actually, it
Right,
was the
okay,
Daffodil Laundry in those days.
right. I don't think I'd
Was
ever
on
been to
one
that.
side and the co-op was on the other.
Right. What's the chapel I'm thinking of then? Is it because for me also, I don't know whether whether they had Gaman Vaganis. Did you ever go to Gaman Vagani, which was
I
basically
went I
a
went to
singing
many of them.
festival? Yes.
Yeah, I went to many of them, and I think that was the that was quite depressing for me.
Really?
Look, the hymns, Imbo Bin Sin Fadlonde,
Well, beautiful.
Dana Bannerave, they sing this at the rugby.
They do.
I,
They
I
do.
I found it quite depressing. A lot of people are not going to like me here to hear me say this, but I found it depressing. I found the industrial town, the sounds I was hearing. When I went to school, we had school assembly, and it was very dour. And we
Yes.
bowed our heads and said a prayer. And at the end of the day, it was, now the day's over. What's all that
Yes.
about?
Well,
The day wasn't over.
uh,
I was going home to play with my friends.
yes. Yeah. I mean, it is. Um, It's wet, is how I remember it down there. And every time I go back now, I just notice how all the houses, the walls, everything is there's drip marks. You know, they must have a layer of dirt above the kind of Swansea area, and the rain comes down, and it's pretty constant drizzle and rain. But I said the buildings there all seem to have. Tear stains, like mascara, tear stains kind of dripping down the outside of them. But my experiences, because it's very similar there. We lived, and you were Rufus Lewis Avenue, weren't you? I mean, I lived in Frampton Road at
I
one
was in
point.
Burnamlock Road. So basically, I grew up on quite a dark housing estate. I had the
Right.
park to play in. You
Yes.
were on Alexander Road. I
Well,
believe Andrew
eventually,
Demery
Frampton
was
Road
down the bottom.
originally. Yeah, correct,
Yeah.
correct, correct.
Andrew Demery at one time was living at the bottom of Brynamlug on Alexander Road, just on the
Right, got
corner.
you. Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yeah. But so I went to Bryn Teg Sunday School. And I think that was, I say my father was a churchgoer, my mother not at all. But we went perhaps similarly. There wasn't much to do back then. And on a Sunday, there was nothing you were allowed to do. You may remember we were pretty much locked in. You know, it was back, you're talking 50 years ago, where you might say my father wouldn't even wash the car, didn't want to be seen doing anything even outside. It was the day of rest, so we had that element to it. But I did love the Gaman Vaganis, and so Calon Lan is another one, you see. So Calon Lan as a song, and again, I was telling you at the London Welsh meeting that I went to recently, we had the lyrics to Calon Lan, and they would sing it one verse in Welsh, one verse in English. But I don't know if I never knew the English translation of it. But it's quite beautiful. Calon, it's talking about singing for a pure heart. You know what I mean? It's really and so those songs, and I'm going to put Un Bo Bin Sin Fadlon as well. There, I've got to say that is a very rousing song. But listen, we'll move off that onto when did music lift you up instead, maybe
Okay.
of.
I grew up in the first couple of years of my life in Cecil Road at my grandparents' house with my
Cecil
parents.
Road, right? Okay.
And my mother, for her 21st birthday, had a Marconi radiogram. Now, it's hard to describe to young people who are used to streaming things on a mobile phone, but this piece of furniture, I call it,
Mm,
was a work of art. It
mm,
was walnut. It was veneered walnut.
mm.
There was a speaker, and I can see it now. the lid came down halfway,
Yes.
and it had a velvet felt table. It was brown, and on the left-hand side there was a record player which played 45s, 33s, and 78s, if you were
78.
willing to flip the stylus over.
Yeah.
On the right-hand side there was a tuning
Yes.
set,
Radio.
and they had white Bakelite knobs to tune in.
Yeah.
And in the old days, there was a weird sound like a synthesizer when you tuned these channels. You had medium
Yes, of
wave, you had
course.
short
Yeah.
wave, you had long wave.
Yeah.
I found that fascinating. But there was a connection I made to the music, which I'll explain in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that I was only small, so I was able to crawl behind the radiogram
Mm.
and peer through the holes in the back of the radiogram.
Imagine how big it is in comparison to you as a young child. It was colossal, and it's the size of a car in some respects. In comparison,
I actually climbed onto the table and pulled it on top of me
Oh.
when I was younger. I would have been about 3 or 4. How I survived, I don't know.
Right? Yeah,
Probably
fair
hit me on
weight
the
to that
head.
as well. I would have thought.
Yeah, yeah. So I'd crawl around the back so I could peer through the holes in the back. And as this thing was switched on, it would warm up, and it had valves inside it. And I was fascinated by the valves
Mm.
and the fact that this sound could be pulled out of the air. I'm talking about the radio, let alone the records. So the records then started providing me with a mysterious magic. It was the music that came out. And at the time, my parents were pretty mainstream with their musical tastes. They
Right,
weren't
yes.
really into rock and roll. I missed
No.
out. I missed out on that.
Me too. They could have been into the Beatles, couldn't they? They could have been buying the Beatles. They could have been buying the Rolling
Could have been
Stones.
buying
But
the
I'm
Beatles.
guessing it's Tom Jones and Engelbert Humperdinck.
Okay, well, I made a list the other day because at 2 o'clock in the morning, you don't really have much
Much
to
to
send you
do.
to sleep.
Yeah. Yeah.
This
Well,
is
you need to
sad.
get Twitter or X.
This is really sad. So I made a list of these records. I've still
Yeah.
got them. So there was Matt Monro.
Yes. Oh, but which one? I got Born Free is beautiful. The man's.
Yeah,
He was a bus driver, by the way. I don't know whether he was. I think he was East or West London bus driver. It's not his. I can't remember what his actual name is, but a stunning voice. I say,
Great
Born
voice.
Free.
there was Petula Clark,
Yes. Yes.
Kathy Kirby.
Another name. I probably wouldn't know
Yeah,
the songs.
Kathy Kirby. There was an American, the Carlin twins. When that was, I don't know where they got that American record from, but there was Nat King Cole. My dad loved Nat King Cole, so I always heard Ramblin' Rose.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. Now there were 48s around, so the Platters. I had a few Platters records which I've still got. Smoke Gets in Your Eyes,
Right.
Only You. Many years later, I walked into a record store and found the Platters' greatest hits. And in amongst a lot of the rock music I bought that album, and I think it's more of a nostalgic
Yeah.
look back at what I was listening to in the past. Obviously, the early Tom Jones stuff, but Billy Davis, Tell Him, that was a classic track at the time.
Right.
And Bilk, Stranger on the Shore. My dad
Strangers on
played
the
it all
Shore.
the time.
When I first came to London, they could call it London. I lived in Potter's Bar. I think Akerbilk is from Potter's Bar originally. So, but it is again a huge name in the day. And when I don't know if you're aware, I worked in Picton Music in Swansea for a couple of years. That was my first kind of job, and used to have to demonstrate keyboards. So for every sound on a keyboard, if it was a harpsichord, I had a little bit of Mozart that you do, and for clarinet, it was
Strangers on the Shore.
Strangers on the Shore. So, but lovely. Again, I think we were very fortunate. Listen, maybe our parents' generation, music around the house probably wouldn't have been piped in, although they may have had a radio, and but there wasn't that much live music played on the radio. Certainly not much recorded music back then. But they may have had pianos at home. I mean, we've seen a transition from houses back in the day, it was common for them to have a piano, and that would be perhaps for many families, it was the form of entertainment. Everyone would gather around and kind of sing. But then I suppose as recorded music came in and record players and radiograms, that kind of took over. And now there's very few pianos in households, or even keyboards, or I would even go so far as to say there's not many musical instruments nowadays. You'll see a few guitars behind me here, but I think that it's too much effort. It's a lot of practice required to learn to play an instrument. Not so much practice to listen to it, you see.
And to not have too many distractions either, Mark.
Yeah,
Life has a lot of distractions these days. I've gained my appreciation of 60s music probably more in the last 10 years than I ever did when I was younger.
Right.
I'm a big Dusty Springfield fan now.
Right.
I really like Dusty Springfield.
Right.
Dusty in Memphis is a great album. And when I see these greatest hits albums, I do pick them up. Dusty Springfield is just amazing. I love her voice. I love the music. These were only 2.5 minutes long, most of these records.
Yes. And Dusty in Memphis, I'm assuming it's not live in Memphis. It's just you recorded it in Memphis, is it? I mean, with producers from that area. Have you ever been to Memphis, by the way? I would thoroughly recommend.
I've never been to Memphis, no.
I've been to. I was in business. I did a couple of days' work in Nashville, and I drove down to Memphis. I did go to Gracelands. I mean, it was nice to go there, but I wasn't blown away. But to go to Sun Studios. That was really quite special. That was that was Center of the Universe, the original recording studio where Elvis, Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis, all of those guys, and maybe I'll check that out. Dusty Springfield in Memphis, Dusty in Memphis.
It's a classic album,
right?
I think it's one of those 1001 albums you must hear before you die.
All right. Okay. Well, I'll definitely be checking that one out later this evening.
Was it Buddy Guy who said that the first time he met Muddy Waters was sweeping the floor at Sun Studios?
Right. Yes, more than possible. More than possible. The world has changed an awful lot in the last 50, 60 years, that's for sure. Most for the better, but some not necessarily so. But that's another story.
I guess I looked to escape in my younger years. I was looking for escape all the time. I'd be the kid who was daydreaming out of the window, looking at the clouds, picking shapes. And once a year, Mark, you'd remember we used to have a carnival in Gosainen.
Yeah.
And I used to come home from school and I'd walk past Park of Warren, where they used to set it all up. So they'd start putting it together on Wednesday, they'd arrive. And Thursday, they'd start building it. So these greasy guys in a caravan would rock up. They'd have half a cigarette dangling out of their mouths. They'd be drinking all night, but they would work like Trojans during the day. Mm. So they would take all these bits of metal and wood and steel sheet, and they'd assemble these things together into a fantastic structure. They take it down, they put it back up again. And then on the Friday morning, these truck doors would open. They were big MAN trucks and Scammell trucks. The doors would open and these, what looked like spaceships, would descend out of this truck, colored spaceships.
I know exactly, with the lights on them.
They were Dodgem cars.
Yes.
Okay. But the color intensity was amazing. They had such great color jobs, and the fairground equipment was all painted. I mean, these guys had such talent to be able to put that together and paint the trucks and paint the structure. It was just amazing. So the point I was getting to was this. I felt sonically, if you like, I felt I'd been held back and there was something missing in my life. And then on a Friday, there'd be a warm-up to the carnival, which was on the Saturday. So on a Friday night, they'd start everything up.
Yeah.
So they'd start the generators. There'd be these huge generators. They'd start up. There'd be a cloud of smoke. they'd start the dodgems, the lights would come on. We had those little bulbs that used to go around. They'd circle around the outside. They'd be testing these dodgem cars, and then they put the sound system on. And from nowhere, you got the sound of the Ronettes. All the Phil Spector music just flooded out, and it was like a dam had broken. And you're being held up, and all these emotions started hitting me. The music was just amazing. I didn't hear it on the radio, but there was something about that Phil Spector wall of sound that sounded like nothing else on the planet.
Yes.
It was just incredible.
Yeah. What an assault on the senses. You're talking visual, the colours, the artistry, the shapes, the smells,
Absolutely.
because the generator in the background, and I don't know, the onions being fried, you know, that what a fairground smells like. But he said, and then on top of that, then the icing on the cake, the music as well, to kind of lock it all together. Fantastic.
And then there were so many people who would gather the following day, particularly. Friday night, you'd get the youngsters hang out, and they'd all sit around the outside of the dodgems.
That's right. That's right. I would be
They'd
there.
all
You'd
sit
probably
on the
be dressed
fence.
in. Would you have a denim jacket on? You probably did at that point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I had my Wrangler
absolutely.
jacket. Yeah.
Same here. I had a, but my memory is slightly different, and I had a terrible night after having been on the waltzers. I don't know for listeners, the waltzers are. I don't know whether they still do waltzes anymore. But I'm the kind of person who would get travel sick and seasick. So the last thing I should have gone on was that. So I spent that Friday evening. I might have spent my 50 pence or whatever I had going straight on there, and then the rest of the evening, my head between my knees, trying not to be sick.
I'm actually glad in a way that I was too young to be drinking in those days. I don't think I could have coped with those waltzers if I'd have been out down the pub. But look, it was one of those experiences that stayed with me for the rest of my life.
That's beautiful, beautiful.
And I started getting a fascination with music, and I started putting records together. And you're probably going to ask what the first record I bought.
I am.
And it was a reissue. It was a reissue. And it was on the Immediate record label.
Which is the Rolling Stones label, isn't it? Isn't it? Yeah.
It was the Small Faces, and it was Itchy-Coo Park.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's very trippy.
And that to me was enlightening as well, because I heard sounds, some of those sounds were psychedelic in that record, because that was 1967 that record first came out.
Right.
And I guess it would have been about 1974, 1975 when I first heard it. It was on re-release, and I thought it was an absolutely amazing record.
Steve Marriott, wasn't it?
Steve Marriott, yeah.
Now the flanging or the phasing effect, as it kind of literally would go across. And again, early. I don't know whether the original would have sounded the. I don't know whether the original. I couldn't tell you the date on that. Whether it would have been in mono or stereo. But by the time you were buying it, it was probably in stereo. But I'm not sure that the radio. Had you upgraded from the radiogram at this point? Had you got to a stereo yet?
I had a cheap stereo Fidelity stereo unit, which a lot of people had in those days. It was all our parents could afford.
That's right.
And that sound that panned across from the right to the left channel sounded like a dive bomber.
Yes.
Coming down.
Yeah.
And going across the sound. And I thought, this is really, really interesting.
Yes.
So then I went on holiday with my parents to Breen Sands, which was a Pontins establishment. Right. And in the corner of the room next to the pool table was a jukebox.
Mm.
And this jukebox was fascinating because it had music I'd never heard before. Now, I'd heard Bowie and people like that on the radio, but there were old records on there.
Right.
Old Chiffons records, some Chuck Berry. But the one that really stood out for me was an early Pink Floyd track, See Emily Play.
Really?
This would have been about 1974. So this was actually a year after Dark Side of the Moon came out. So I didn't know anything at all about the history of the band. And See Emily Play had something about it. It was whimsical. It had something that nothing else sounded like at the time. It wasn't standard rock and roll. It wasn't standard Rolling Stones or Beatles, although anyone who likes Sergeant Pepper would probably disagree with me there, or His Majesty's Satanic Verses of the Rolling Stones. But there was something about Syd Barrett and that sound that was magical. And a lot of people divide Pink Floyd into three eras.
All right.
There was the Syd Barrett era, there was the classic era in the middle, and then the era without Roger Waters.
Yes.
I found that particularly amazing. So coincidentally, a few years later, we went into our first high school. For those of you who don't know, it was a comprehensive school. Those of you who are looking from overseas, you're probably used to high schools. And we had a brand new drama theatre. And the drama theatre opened up. It was a state-of-the-art drama theatre. And I remember standing up in the control box, looking down on the stage, and it was pitch dark. And of all people, who was in the corner but Andrew Demery? And Andrew Demery decided that the first album he was going to try on this new sound system we had in the drama theatre was Dark Side of the Moon. So people will tell you about their first experience of listening to Dark Side of the Moon. Well, I actually was in a dark room with a very good sound system.
Yes.
And that heartbeat, it was just absolutely incredible. When that album starts, I don't think I've only ever had one more experience listening to an album in my life for the first time. And I think David Gilmour said at the time, or actually quite much later on when he was interviewed, he said, when he was asked what his greatest regret is, and he said, my greatest regret is I never got to listen to Dark Side of the Moon for the first time from start to finish.
Yes, yeah. I think it's a case for many artists is that, and usually by the time they've finished the entire recording and production process, many of them are probably sick to the back teeth of much of the stuff. It's been played over and over and over and over and over and over again. Plus, with a band like Pink Floyd in particular, many of the decisions that will have been made in the kind of editing suite or when it was actually being recorded, there would be lots of disagreements. There were lots of musical differences. Well, you know what they were like as a band, that's for sure. So so that when the first era of Floyd, they said with Syd Barrett, what albums are they? Because for me, I'd say I see Emily Play, I'm not that struck on at all. We've got a bit of a
See Emily Play wasn't on the first two albums.
Right, it's not Pipers at the Gates of Dawn type thing, is it?
Piper at the Gates of Dawn was the first album.
Yeah.
And the second album was Saucerful of Secrets, which only had a little bit of Syd on.
I'm tempted. Saucerful of Secrets are touring in the UK. Their tickets go on sale today, actually. I'm tempted to go and see them in the Albert Hall this year.
Well, that's Nick Mason's band. Nick Mason was the drummer with Floyd at the time.
Yes.
And he's playing music from early Pink Floyd up until I think...
It's got Echoes on there. I think they do a big long version of that.
He may have something from Echoes on there, yeah. And I understand Gary Kemp is playing with him, who was with Spandau Ballet.
If you've not... there's plenty of stuff on YouTube with them. It's really impressive. Very, very impressive. And as I didn't get to see... Never did see... Well, it's not Pink Floyd. I've seen Roger Waters a few times now, but... I'm very tempted to go, and it's the Albert Hall, like good venue, not great sound actually, but my guess is what they do, because it is, as I say, Nick Mason's Saucerful of Secrets, but it'll be a very psychedelic light show as well, but kind of old school kind of lights, which I'm trying to replicate. You get my lights behind here. So I think I will be going on that. But so you broke it down into three eras, era 1, 2, and 3. Is there a favorite? Or would you say, you like them all, or you could probably stack rank them? But
I like the classic Floyd.
Yeah.
I wasn't so struck on Atom Art Mother. It was an interesting album, and I think it went to #1. But Medal, which had Echoes on it, is a great album.
I only listen. Is
That
Atom Heart and Mother the one that's got the kind of soundtrack of a guy frying a breakfast in there? Is this
that's Alan's Psychedelic
right?
Breakfast.
I played that on. I'd read about it, so I played it on headphones recently. I really quite liked it.
That was actually produced by Alan Parsons.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So he was the sound engineer on there. He actually went on to work on Dark Side of the Moon as well. Famously,
That's
he
right.
engineered that album.
Yeah.
So followed by Metal, which had the whole of one side was Echoes. It was obscured by Clouds. Now, for me, that was a fundamental change in the sound of Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
There was stuff going on that album, obscured by Clouds, that it's very underrated as far as I'm concerned.
Mm, mm.
And if you
When you mentioned
listen
it, if you
very,
saw my face, I sneered.
yeah,
I don't have a great recollection of it, or but
yeah,
is it
perhaps,
you
yeah, it was
clearly liked it,
actually partially the theme music to a movie called
that's
La
right,
Valle.
right.
I think it's worth another listen. Obscured by Clouds is definitely worth another listen. There's some fantastic stuff on there. And it's, for me, it's the first real guitar breaks that Gilmour created and put down on vinyl. There was a lot of noodling around on Amagama and a few other albums, but I think Obscured by Clouds is where Gilmour started emerging.
Got you.
And of course, we all know what happened when Dark Side of the Moon arrived. It was like a spaceship landing from another planet. Um, if you're a Floyd fan, I mean, it's very hard. I mean, for me, we'll argue till the cows come home, but Dark Side to me is part of my core listening.
Mm.
Even if I don't have it on the record player or my CD player now, I've got about 4 or 5 versions, including the quadraphonic vinyl, but I don't have a
Ooh.
quadraphonic system anymore.
Ah, right.
That's another story.
Yeah.
Um, but the sound that changed between Obscured by Clouds and Dark Side of the Moon. And we can argue whether or not it was production, but the production of Dark Side of the Moon, I believe, is second to none. I don't think anybody's achieved that. I listened to Sergeant Pepper. I
Mm,
listened to Pet Sounds. I've got Smile by Brian Wilson.
mm.
I've listened to a lot of these albums which are supposedly groundbreaking, but I look, it's just me. It's just
Dark
personal
Side of the Moon,
opinion.
I would say no. It's probably, as I say, the pinnacle of very complex music of that era. Probably the peak, and they even I read an article recently on the Dark Side of the Moon mixing desk. So the desk itself has also, like anything at Abbey Road or anything to do with Dark
Yeah.
Side of the Moon, it takes on legendary status. I think the desk was sold. It's been sold a couple of times. It's like a couple of $1 million, I think, for a desk that probably won't be, nobody being using it, but the music came through those channels and out to our ears. Interestingly, you mentioned Andrew Demery. I love the idea of him. He's like a wizard there. He's like the Dumbledore of Gorsinan musically, in as much as he's like a pusher. He's introducing all these young teenagers, as said, kind of open to all sorts, probably open to all sorts of music. And if you think about how many people came away from Gorsinan and said Pink Floyd, maybe maybe nationwide, worldwide, people of our age kind of got into that. But I don't know how far you took Zappa, but I would have said Andrew Demery probably introduced Zappa to Gorsinan, and there are many people who then have become lifelong Zappa fans. We had Chris Roberts Tanner on, a few weeks ago, and his favorite album from back in the day was Hot Rats. And
I
again,
like I
Demery.
liked Hot I liked Hot Rats, but to me,
Yes, I agree. Joe's Garage.
if you want an introduction to Zappa,
Yes.
Joe's Garage Acts 1, 2, and 3 is probably one of the best things you could listen to.
And that's beautifully recorded as well. That in stereo is something else.
Yeah.
Again, maybe for Zappa, probably, yeah, that's probably his peak. Although I might say Overnight Sensation and Apostrophe had some amazing music on it. I really like, as I said, the production on Joe's Garage 1, 2, and 3 was awesome.
I've got I've got quite a few Zappa albums. I won't go through them all now, but um,
But
not so
Demery put
long
that in
ago,
front of you, my guess, is it? Andrew Demery, did he, as I said, try this instead?
he was look. I don't know if you ever saw that video on the internet some time ago called the Bog Wizard. And this Bog Wizard, you should write this down. You've got to see this. You've
Right,
got to see this.
right,
This Bog Wizard is in Germany and he's dressed in a medieval costume and he's standing in the middle of a field
right.
and they're protesting about something. And I don't even know what it was about. It's just so fascinating. So this Bog Wizard is swaying back and forth, walking across the mud. So these police officers in riot gear are trying to arrest him. And every time they get near him, they fall over. And he just moves aside like some phantom. And I couldn't believe what I was watching to start with, but they're so weighed down with all their equipment. He must be standing on some firm ground because it looks remarkable. So my analogy to Andrew Demery was he was some sort of gateway, if you like, some sort of
Yes,
Stargate
yes.
into a new musical
Brilliant.
adventure.
Yes.
Okay. Because Andrew grew his hair quite long and eventually he had a big black beard.
And he
But I
looked like
always
Zappa,
remember
don't you think? He
Andrew.
was facially, you know what I mean? He looked like him. I think he may have even had the old Zappa. I can't remember what it's called, the little tash under here.
Yeah.
If you
Little
look, I say, if
goatee.
you look Zappa or the images or the photographs of Zappa from that Joe's Garage era, I always thought Andrew Demery looked like that. But I remember his front room. I didn't get your Dark Side of the Moon drama. The drama studio, by the way, it was burnt down before I got to the
Yeah.
school, so that had
Yeah.
disappeared.
Oh, you
But I
missed it.
remember listening to, I think Andrew Demery would have played some Floyd, some Weather Report, introduced me to Weather Report, for God's sake, back
Huge
in
fan
the
of Weather Report. Yeah.
mid 70s, and Zappa as well. But I love that Stargate. But but you wouldn't be who you are. I personally, I think
Yeah.
we could
Yeah.
probably say all of us wouldn't be who we are today if we hadn't had, say, the introduction of those pieces of music or those bands at that time. Our lives potentially would have gone in a different direction.
Every time you saw Andrew Demery, he was carrying some piece of progressive music of some kind. Of course, in those days it was all vinyl, right?
Yeah.
I don't even think we were using cassettes until we could afford to drive. But he'd be carrying a Genesis album or a Yes album
Yes.
or some obscure band I'd never even heard of, or Budgie or somebody
Mm.
I hadn't heard of. And it certainly opens your eyes. But I always remember him being so unconventional compared to his mum and dad, because his dad, if you remember, had one leg shorter than the other.
Yes, I know he had a shoe, didn't he? And
Yeah, and he had this wooden shoe, and he was such a respectable man.
mm.
Andrew's father, I can't remember his name. I wish I could, but he
Always
was
jacket, shirt and tie and trouser. You know what I mean? Always
absolutely
dressed up.
immaculate,
Yes, yes.
absolutely immaculate. And then you create a son who sort of, I mean, he's almost like the prodigal son as far as we were
Mm,
concerned in the
mm,
sixth
mm,
form.
mm,
Sitting in the
mm.
sixth form, he would wander through, and you really want to know what he's got under his arm, because whatever it was important. If it was Led Zeppelin, it was Physical Graffiti or some new album that
I
they.
believe he was also said sounding like a business here, but he was well funded. His parents, although I don't think it's not that his parents are wealthy, but I think they totally encouraged whatever his interest was.
Yeah.
And as I said, records back then were pretty expensive, but he seemed to have the curiosity, the interest, but also the ability to go on and buy those. And again, I'm assuming Sullivan's in Gorsinan would have been hallowed turf to you. So many of the records that you will have bought over the years will have been bought at that record shop. But yeah, and
Yeah.
Andrew did go on. I mean, Chris is kind of I think eventually he's gone out in the US. He became a sound engineer of some note. and still out there today, I believe. So
Be great if you could get him on the podcast, Mark.
if you've got his, if you've got any contact details, let's see if we can. We'll do a special episode with the Stargate, Andrew the Stargate Demery. But it'd be interesting to see who his, because again, where did I used to get Sounds and Melody Maker. If you think about influences, where did you hear about bands, and then of course Top of the Pops, 7 on a Thursday, but that was only going to get you kind of the top 30. But we were also fortunate with the Old Grey Whistle Test, as with Whispering Bob. And if you think about the acts that they would put on, I mean, they did expose the youth of the UK to all sorts of things.
We were very lucky, both from a pop music point of view, and I don't knock pop music as much as I used to. I've got a great pop music collection, and some of that music in those days was absolutely fantastic.
Yes.
I think Bowie's a genius. I think Bowie was a pop genius. I don't think there's any controversial statement there. I think bands like Mott the Hoople were amazing. I think
momentarily amazing terrific for a period. Bowie, as I say, you can probably say throughout his entire career, right from Space Oddity, which I think, was probably his first time onto the airwaves, but right through to he maybe died maybe 5 or 6 years ago, something like that. And I think in his last year, I do also have, is it Black Star? I think is the final album.
Yeah. I've got that album. That's a beautiful album. That's dark. It is dark. It's a very dark album. Very dark album. I've actually in my hand at the moment, I've got the trilogy of David Bowie. And I would recommend anybody who's into serious listening to David Bowie.
The trilogy.
You need to get Low.
Yes.
You need to get Heroes.
Yes.
And you need to get Lodger.
Lodger, so those, the other two you mentioned, are they in sequence, by the way? I don't know, did Lodger?
I can't remember which way around it was. The Berlin trilogy, it's his time in Berlin.
Oh, was Lodger the same? Eno is on the 3 of those then, is he?
I believe so. I think Fripp's involved as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Lodger is good.
It's very good stuff.
I've not.
It's funny. I could tell you a story.
Please do.
We were talking about Top of the Pops, and we were talking about the Old Grey Whistle Test. And it's funny because we get flashbacks to music we heard years and years ago. Some time ago, I would say probably about 20 years ago, we just built a house up in the hills here in Perth, and funds were a bit hard to come by, and we needed to generate a bit of money. So I ended up selling a lot of my rock albums. It's a long story, but basically the agreement with my wife was, if we're going to sell this
my heart
music
and soul
collection, which is so dear to my heart, the deal is that I will eventually replace it in CD form over the coming years. So that was the agreement. So I was quite lucky because the guy who bought my records was a guy called Wharfie. He was from Fremantle. A lot of people in Fremantle don't have names. They have a nickname, and you never get to know what their surnames are.
Amazing.
Don't ask me why. It's probably the same in London. So you never actually know.
Is he a tradesman? Is he a tradesman, probably?
He worked on the wharf. He worked on the wharf in Fremantle Docks.
Yeah.
So I had a bit of an affinity there. I come from a port town, Swansea. He comes from Fremantle, and I love Fremantle anyway. So I sold him these albums. And,
can I just ask, though, to him, were you nutty?
No. I don't know. He might have thought I was insane. But of course, a lot of those albums, he said the reason I'm buying these albums, and he gave me a good price for them, was because they were manufactured in Britain.
Right.
And the Australian albums were very thin vinyl.
Right, got you.
So some of the albums that he bought were really high quality. So I could name the albums. There's Black Sabbath, Paranoid went, my Floyd collection went, my Floyd solo albums went.
Did you look after your records, by the way, as a teenager, and in your, were they
absolutely.
well? Right, okay. I was terrible with records as a youngster. We just used to leave them out of their covers, you know. I mean, they'd just be stacked
Yeah,
up against one another. So they have, in not a long period, but in no time at all, they would be in a pretty shabby state. I've only got a few of them today, but I look after my records now, but I didn't back then. So your records were quite valuable then, except you may
they
not have
were.
had much money for them because of the. It all depends when you sold them. If you sold them today, by the way, probably at the peak.
Yeah, yeah. I think
Orphy is a wealthy man.
it was it was heart wrenching at the time. I mean, it's still I still get nightmares about it. But look, I've replaced it. But the funny thing is, Mark, the funny thing is, I've replaced most of what I sold, but I didn't replace some of them, and I didn't replace some of them because my musical tastes changed.
Yeah, yeah.
I moved into different spheres of influence. There was always the core music I would listen to. There was always Pink Floyd and Bruce Springsteen and Eric Clapton and the general stuff that I'd be listening to all the time. But I started developing a taste for other music, and I think jazz fusion I particularly liked.
Right.
There were the core bands, Return to Forever, Weather Report, and Mahavishnu Orchestra with John McLaughlin.
Yeah, I'd say I mean, he's a great guitarist, but I'm a guitarist, but his guitar playing never spoke to me as Richie Blackmore's or Jeff Beck's would do. But technically, and he supposedly, I think John McLaughlin worked in a music shop on. Charing Cross Road, and was involved in selling guitars to many of those 1960s guitarists. I'm just trying to think. I think Andy Summers from the Police says he
Yeah,
bought. John McLaughlin was the guitarist in the shop where he bought. I think it was a Les Paul that he ended up selling to Eric Clapton. I love those stories. But yeah, that's and again, Return to Forever. That's Chick Corea, then I think, there isn't it? So that
Chick
is
Corea, yeah, Stanley Clarke.
Stanley Clarke, School
Now
Days.
people talk about um, they talk about Jaco Pastorius being the greatest bass player in the world.
Yeah.
I've seen some great bass players, and Stanley Clarke is a brilliant bass player.
Mm-hmm.
He was absolutely amazing and upright. He played acoustic bass, upright bass. He played electric upright. He played precision bass, jazz bass, and that was just in one concert. But I guess I was lucky because we had Lenny White on the drums and Chick Corea on keyboards at the same time, and
Yep.
Jean-Luc Ponty
John.
was playing electric violin at that particular concert.
I only got to tell you, just interrupt here. The 2 days ago, I did another musical differences conversation with a guy called Glenn Graham, and Mahavishnu came up on that, but also Jean-Luc Ponty as well. So we're running in small circles. A little bit of trivia I want to throw in here as well. So you mentioned Jaco, and I don't know if we ever came across a guy from Swansea originally, called Lawrence Cottle. So Lawrence Cottle, there was the Cottle family were musicians in Swansea. Richie Cottle he became a London session musician. He was a tremendous keyboard player. Played with Bowie on the Glass Spiders tour. I mean, so about mid 1980s, Richie Cottle was very highly regarded as a session
I saw that
musician.
tour. I
Yeah,
saw that tour at Wembley.
I
Peter
did too.
Frampton played guitar on that.
Well, I didn't know that.
Peter Frampton was live, yeah.
I saw that show. It was pretty grim, wasn't it? That's my mery of it.
At the beginning, he descended on a string from the top of a spider. It had huge legs, but it was a scary spider. But he had a lot of dancers with him and backing singers. Was it Carlos Car, the guy who plays the bongos?
All right.
I can't remember his name. He's been playing with Bowie for years. Well, he was playing with Bowie for years.
I thought the guitarist's name was Carlos something, if I remember rightly.
Yeah.
But before I go off that, Lawrence Cottle, I want to bring up Lawrence Cottle from Swansea, Richie Cottle's brother.
I've heard the name.
And Lawrence, you can see him regularly in the UK. He now is a kind of a Jaco Pastorius big band, and he actually had lessons with Jaco. He went out to
Wow.
Florida back in the, when would that have been, in 70s or 80s? I can't remember when Jaco died, but and he
He
plays very
started giving
much.
lessons out actually when he had
Right.
a bit of a break from Weather Report.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't
Well,
know if you know the
Lawrence,
story. I don't know if you know the story, but Weather Report or Joseph Windmill was playing in a bar,
right?
and Jacko came up to him and said, "I'd like to play in your band. I'm the best bass guitarist in the world." So
And he
Joseph
was.
Windmill turned Joseph Windmill turned around to him and told him to f off, get
But
out of here.
a few years later, he would have gone back to him. I've read a couple of books on Jacko and Peter Erskine. I liked as well. So that 8:30 was an album that I bought when that first came out. I got it in Derek's Records in Swansea. And again, the opening, very evocative. Again, I would play that in the front room of my parents' house with the lights out, and it's a live album, and you just hear the snare drum kind of kick in, and they go into Birdland at the very beginning, and extraordinary. That would have been, if I had the opportunity to go back and see certain bands at a certain time. I think that's the time that I would have probably wanted to see Weather Report.
I
Never
think
did. I saw.
yeah,
I was going to say
I
I
think
saw
Chris
lots
could
of.
correct us on whether or not I'm wrong here, but I don't think they ever had a lead guitarist with them. Weather Report. It
Yeah,
was
I don't think it was
bass,
always bass,
drums,
keyboards,
keyboards,
and
and
sax.
saxophone.
Probably percussion as well at
Yeah,
times. But bearing in mind, Jacko and Peter Erskine would have played with Joni Mitchell at one point, and Pat Metheny on
great
guitar.
concert at the Hollywood Bowl. That was amazing.
Right.
I don't know if
Andrew
you've seen
Demery,
that.
Stargate would probably have been into Pat Metheny. I'm sure. I have no doubt.
I've got, I've actually got a Pat Metheny album. It's a
I've
classic
seen.
collection. It's on the ECM record label.
Yeah, yeah.
Jan actually bought it for me on vinyl. It's wonderful. It really is
I've
wonderful.
seen Pat Metheny on a number of occasions, and he said, and most notably at Ronnie Scott's. Oh, let's say about 4 or 5 years ago, where I'm sitting, we're on the floor. I'm literally 8 feet away. We're seated. Pat Metheny playing with a trio that he had at the time, and as you do at Ronnie's, I'm eating burger and chips. You know what I mean? It just kind of seems wrong. Pat is there playing, but that is the kind of Ronnie Scott's vibe. The guy I mentioned earlier on, who mentioned John Luke Ponty, the guy was Glenn Graham. He also, I don't know if you've seen it. He mentioned Jeff Beck, and he said, "Oh, I've seen Jeff Beck. I saw him at Ronnie's. He was at, those if you've ever seen the Jeff Beck at Ronnie's
Yeah,
DVD, which is probably again maybe 15 years ago, but he was in his 60s probably, but his technique was probably at its peak with who was on drum, Vinnie Colaiuta on drums. Vinny would have been the drummer. I'm thinking he would have been the drummer on Joe's Garage
quite
back with
possibly.
Zappa back then. And but yeah, he saw those gigs. What do you get to see many gigs in Perth?
I do, Mark, and I think you'd be very, very surprised who we have actually seen here.
Right.
I'll
Because you are
start by
remote.
band.
Perth is remote, isn't it? It just described
Perth's
because
the most remote major city in the world, as far as I know.
right,
We're probably as close to Singapore as we are to Sydney in terms of flight wise.
right,
Now then, to start to tell you how many bands I've seen,
yeah,
I'd be here forever. But I mean,
right,
I've had the chance to see Buddy Guy here 3 times.
lovely,
I've met Buddy Guy. I was very lucky. I've seen the Rolling Stones twice. I saw the Voodoo Lounge and I saw them on Fire 15. Now, that was the time Mick Jagger arrived with the band in Perth, went out for a meal, and got the news while he was out eating that his girlfriend had died in Perth. So the
well,
band left, and I thought, that's it. We'll never see him again. And Keith Richards said before they left, "We'll be back. We always come back," and they
right,
did come back.
right,
That was remarkable. But the Voodoo Lounge concert I saw a few years, well, would have been about 20 years ago now, 25 years ago. The Voodoo Lounge was at the Perry Lakes. Now, Perry Lakes hosted the Commonwealth Games at one time. It's a very old stadium and running track. And the Voodoo Lounge concert I saw that night actually astounded me. I was in a good position in the crowd, but it actually astounded me. And not long after that, the Voodoo Lounge came out on a video, which was introduced by Oprah Winfrey.
Mm-hmm.
She came on stage and introduced the band. She called it The Band. Introduced it. I saw that concert on the video, and it was not as good as the concert I saw in Perth.
Right.
Now, one thing I will say about the Rolling Stones. From what I've seen of the Stones in recent years, they're playing better now than they were in the 60s and the 70s.
Right.
Certainly better than they were playing in the early 80s when Keith had all his problems.
Right. Did
The
you see
Rolling
them
Stones,
in Cardiff? They came to Cardiff in 80, or had you left at that point? Didn't they come to...
I left. I missed them in Cardiff. That wasn't the Steel Wheels tour, was it? I can't remember.
No, I
It
think
would have been-
I just remember Phil Harris going to it, I think. And I'm sure at the time it was like it would possibly be the last time he'd ever get a chance to see them. But that was 44 years ago. I saw them in 2022. It wasn't last year, it was the year before. I had never had anything to do with them, ignored them, knew the hits, but didn't pay any attention to them. And then during lockdown, I've had like Friday night is music night. Tonight, by the way, will be music night in here. Lights down, coloured lights on, stereo system here pumping out loud. And I have a cheap copy, a secondhand copy of Rolled Gold. And for some reason I thought, oh, let's have it's kind of a compilation of the Stones. Looked at the four sides. I'm sure I picked maybe side 3 or something new, a few of the tracks, put it on. It just blew me away. I couldn't quite believe it. And I was like, where have you been on? They've been in the air for as long as I was born in '64. The Rolling Stones existed before then, and yet I had ignored them. But I think the key to it for me then was on the back of that side, and to hear, as I said, for me, Jumping Jack Flash is the track, and I could then put that album on right from the very beginning. It was kind of chronological, so it started with "Ooh, I'm Your Man," which is not a great song, but going through there, they're a great compilation. I doubt I have Exile on Main Street, and I've never as an album in its entirety, never done it for me at all. But this compilation, because it's no filler, it's all good tracks. That's what turned me on. And then about 6 months later, they toured in the UK, and I went to see them. And I would agree, brilliant show. Tremendous. The stagecraft is great, and also, of course, nowadays what you have is great sound systems. The sound engineers. It was open air, but I had a good view, and they performed really, really well. So yeah, I have to say I'm a fan.
I think
now.
one of the things about the Rolling Stones is, for all their fame, they're not a pretentious band. They don't pretend to be anything they're not.
Yes.
So they play a very, very similar. They're very true to R&B and rock and roll, and they don't stray outside that. It's like a formula that seems to work, but it does modernize. Now, here's an album. I picked this up some time ago.
Right. For those listening, this is Keith Richards.
Talk is Cheap. Now then, this came out, I think it was the 30th or 40th anniversary of the album. Talk is Cheap. So it's a double CD. So the first album is general songs that he writes, and they're very good. Some of them are really good. But the reason I wanted to show you this is because on this special edition, on the second CD, is basically a jam session. So he's got Steve Jordan, who's now the Rolling Stones drummer, right?
Yeah, yeah.
He's on the album. And subsequently, the reviews I've read said this is the best Rolling Stones album that wasn't made by the Rolling Stones.
Oh, wow. Right. So a live jam.
The second CD is pretty much a live jam. It's absolutely fantastic. Really, really good.
Okay.
Highly recommend that one.
Right. Yeah. Have you bought what about the new Stones album?
Yes, I've got that. I've got the vinyl. It's in the other room. I've actually got it on fuchsia vinyl. I bought a special edition Fuchsia.
Yeah.
I don't play it, so I copied it onto my computer. I play it on my iPod, but
Right.
I believe legally we're allowed to have a copy for ourselves.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah. Yeah.
keep my
Yeah. Yeah.
vinyl.
Yeah.
So when I buy the vinyl, I keep it. Now, bands I've recently seen in Perth.
Yeah.
The last band I saw before Christmas was The War on Drugs. They are absolutely fantastic live.
I've heard of them, but I might have to check that out.
Their first album might be a bit sus. You may think Slave Ambient's a bit sus, but the subsequent albums were amazing. Now, there's a video clip on YouTube, if it's still available.
Hmm.
Eyes to the Wind is a track called Eyes
Hmm.
to the Wind. And it's them in the studio doing a podcast for Sirius X, I believe it's called.
Sirius, right? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Radio
Sirius X.
station. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Eyes to the Wind. And when you look at them, you think these guys, they look like they've just walked in off the street, but the music is amazing.
Right. They supported the Stones when I saw them. That's why it comes to
Really?
mind. Yes, correct. I saw the Stones was in Hyde Park. So it was one of these British summertime things from I said about 2 years
Yeah.
ago. And War on Drugs. They're like 40-year-olds, aren't they? They're not kids now.
Yeah,
These
these
guys.
aren't
They're-
youngsters.
yeah,
They're
that's
not
right.
youngsters.
They. I didn't see them. I might have caught the end of the set when I was getting something to eat.
And the reason I
Um,
like them is because they combine, it's a sort of, the music style is called shoegaze. Okay?
right.
It's called shoegaze. That's a modern terminology mark for a certain style of music. And it's a mixture between psychedelic rock,
Nice.
Peter Green style guitar playing,
Right.
and I don't know how he described the singing. I really don't know. It's different. I haven't heard anybody else sing like that.
Are they? They're American. I'm guessing. Then are they? Then
I
are they
think
a British
they might
band?
be Canadian.
Right.
Um,
Okay. So I've never
the,
heard of shoegaze before, but we mentioned you've gone from the jam session to the war on drugs shoegaze. You mentioned. So I would say that combination of kind of psychedelic with bits of Peter Green '60s playing and with vocals as well. I mentioned to you when we spoke the other day, Fish, Phish, the
yeah,
band.
I do apologize. I haven't had a chance to listen to them yet, but
Right,
I've heard
they
of them.
are, and I would
Yeah.
recommend. Well, there's a whole bunch of that. Just dive in wherever, and but there is in the US. They've got about 45 live albums. There's another one just about to be released, 6 CD box set of 2 nights that they did back in the early 90s. Like Zappa, they recorded everything, and they're now kind of releasing it, cleaning it up, and releasing it bit by bit by bit by bit. Um, they and I believe there are again a genre in the US of what jam bands. So these guys will do long extended, long drawn out kind of improvised solos, and that's why I don't know whether Pink Floyd ever delivered on that. That's why for me the likes of Deep Purple was it's like talk about there's an extreme pivot. What have we got there? That looks like a movie soundtrack.
Okay, the band are called King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. I know it's a mouthful. King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard.
And
This album is called Ice, Death, Planets, Lungs, Mushrooms, and Lava.
does that come under the psychedelic jam band shoegaze?
Jamming,
Right. Okay.
jamming, long
Right.
jamming, improvisational music.
Right.
And the sound, you'll hear Zappa in there. Definitely,
Right.
you'll hear Zappa in there.
Super.
So
Super.
Perth has got a bit of a sound going at the moment. We'd never claimed to be San Francisco in the 60s, but there are some bands here, a band called Tame Impala. They
Yeah, I've
formed
heard
in
of
Perth.
them. Yeah. Oh, are they from Perth?
I believe they record in the studio. There's only one guy, I've forgotten his name, but there's only two people in the band.
My daughter
But
has recommended them to me, and I have listened to them. And yes, but I haven't stuck at it.
yeah, not one of my favorite bands. I prefer something a bit bit more contemporary. But yeah, and then there's another one called the Psychedelic Porn Crumpets. The Psychedelic Porn Crumpets. Mark, you've got to hear this band. They're on YouTube.
I will check that one out. Have you heard, again, during my lockdown period in Music Night is Friday night here at the Edwards household, I came across a band, a Japanese psychedelic band, Kikagaku Moyo. Have you ever heard of Kikagaku Moyo?
No.
Right. So they are.
Can you send me that name? I'm not going to attempt to write it down. Can you send that to me?
I will. Kikagaku Moyo, and I will point you in the direction of. Well, again, I tell you what I'd recommend. There's a video of them playing live, similarly to what you said about. Was it the band playing for that Sirius FM? Or there's
War on Drugs,
Kikagaku Moyo. Kikagaku Moyo. There's again an American music kind of radio station with where they have bands come in and play live. They do a set, Japanese psychedelic, very much. If you ever listen to any Can, so there's that kind of what do they call a kraut rock element to it, and they've got one of the guys plays a sitar. So it's 5 Japanese guys, 2 guitars, bass, drums, and sitar, and maybe 2 or 3 of them do vocals as well. I think they've just split up. This is a pity. Musical differences. I don't think it was musical differences. I feel they just thought they'd run their course, but I'll send you the details.
I think one of the guys from Cannes is playing in Perth soon. Mark Rothery, is it?
Again, Can for me is something I literally. They're from back in the 60s, from the 70s, but I really only listened to them during lockdown. And I can't remember the name of, it's the famous album that I kind of got into listen, but it was a very interesting period back then. Very interesting.
So very diverse listening. My music collection is probably unconventional compared to a lot of people, but I'm going to recommend a couple of artists I've seen lately who I think are really good.
Okay.
At the Fremantle Arts Centre last year, I went to see Sharon Van Etten. Now, she's not a well-known name at the moment. She's from New York. And this album is called We've Been Going About This All Wrong. There's a couple of poppy tunes on it. Well worth a listen. Even if you don't like it the first time, and I find that with a lot of music, the second time, wow.
Right.
There's something about certain female artists who I like, particularly if they've got a bit of derangement about them. Okay. Some artists have, I mean, Joni Mitchell is Joni Mitchell. She's a folk singer, and she's gone through that high-pitched voice to a deep voice. Sharon Van Etten is one of those who hasn't got a perfect singing voice. And there's something slightly deranged about her when she's performing on stage, which is appealing to me. Now, you're going to be surprised here. Another musician or singer that I'm a big fan of is Stevie Nicks.
Right,
I may talk about Fleetwood Mac later, but Stevie Nicks has got an album called In Your Dreams. Dave Stewart helped produce it. And this album is fantastic.
Right.
And she sings some of those songs as if she's a psychopath. And I'm not talking screaming maniac, but the way the lyrics come out, she's written a lot of the lyrics, obviously. I mean, Rhiannon is a classic, is one of my favorite songs. But
right, yeah, lovely.
In Your Dreams is an amazing album. Now, before that, she was playing a lot with people like Tom Petty and things like that. I'm not a big fan of that music. To be honest, a lot of that American Heartland stuff, I don't listen much to it.
No, Tom Petty. Well, I'm just thinking, what else would there be of that? No, big in the US. Very big in the
Yeah,
US, not very big in the
yeah,
UK. You probably like the Eagles though, but you wouldn't. I wouldn't put Tom Petty and the Eagles
yeah,
side by side.
yeah. I do like the Eagles. I think Don Henley's another genius. I think
Yes.
Don Henley is an amazing guy. Um, I do listen to the Eagles. Long Road Out of Eden is an amazing double album. If you get a chance to listen to that, um, that talks a lot about, as Don Henley does quite often, talk about the decay of society, and he puts
Really?
it in a cryptic way, like New York Minute is another one. That's a great song.
See, I don't
Everything could
really.
change in a New York
Right,
Minute.
and you perhaps, but I don't think I really listen to the lyrics. Do you know? On
Yeah, yeah,
some lyrics,
yeah.
I will perhaps. There are other lyrics I might even know them, but I've never really considered them at all. A lot of the time, I see them just as the verbal accompaniment to the music. I don't know why, but I don't. Perhaps I don't have the depth in
Perhaps you
myself.
need to start listening, Mark. I mean, music is fantastic, but to me, I've come to appreciate it more at my hugely advanced age. The combination of music and lyrics, especially in the right context.
Yes,
Now, I can listen to Dream Theater, latest
yes.
albums, the new albums, and really enjoy them musically, but I really, the lyrics are just not there for me.
Oh, right. Okay. Okay. Yeah. I
I
couldn't tell
mean,
you. I couldn't tell you one way or the other. The only lyrics I've got. I'm just going to see if I can pull it up on my. I've even quoted it a few times on Twitter. Let me just see if I can get it. But Rush lyrics. I always liked Rush. I don't know whether they
yeah,
made as much of an impact with you. But again, given the
yeah,
stage that we live in today, there's an album that they did called "A Farewell to Kings."
yeah,
And if you've seen the album cover, again, I would, as a young denim jacketed, spotty faced, long haired Gosainan Grebo, that I would have been hanging outside John's Chippy on Lacha Cross in the drizzle, in the rain, with a carton of curry sauce and chips. But that even that album has got a kind of a scene of a like a puppeteer, a puppet king sitting upon a throne, but in a state of collapse, and behind him, a destroy a wall half knocked down, and in the distance, a kind of Birmingham 1970s sky. You know what I mean? Kind of
yeah.
skyline. You know, kind of contrast. But the lyrics. Let me just give you the first verse of "A Farewell to Kings." He says. So this had been written in like 1977, but when they turn the pages of history, when these days have passed long ago, will they read of us with sadness for the seeds that we let grow? We turned our gaze from the castles in the distance, eyes cast down on the path of least resistance. So it's talking, of an era, as I said, when it was let's say whether it was the heroic realm. It would say the castle's in the distance, but we all of a sudden, for whatever reason, we cast our eyes down on the path of least resistance. We took the easy option. We take easy option after easy option after easy option, and we end up with a shit show. Basically, but that entire that jumped out. I must have first heard that back in like 1977. Played it on and off over the years. Seen the band numerous times, and then for some reason during lockdown, maybe lockdown's got a lot to do with it.
Do you
I don't
know,
know.
we used to I used to, whenever I got the chance, because I used to be a sponge for listening to new rock music.
Right.
Um, I haven't got on to tell you about what I did later as a disc jockey, but I'll just give you some sort of a sample of what I was listening to. I mean, the records that appealed to me: Rush, The Spirit of Radio. Now, the extended version of that is absolutely incredible. That to me is one of my favorite rock tracks. It's
Yes.
absolutely incredible. That's the type of thing you would have heard on the Friday Night Rock Show with
That's right.
with
Tommy
Tommy
Vance.
Vance. Now, the other one was the theme music from the rock show, if you remember, was "Take It Off the Top," Dixie Dregs.
There was two themes. There's Dixie Dregs with Steve Morse, But there was also Van de Graaff Generator Theme 1, which is the
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
which I is a magnificent piece of music.
yeah.
Steve Morse and Dixie Dregs, that also was great. By the way, it was on the news the other day. There is I think it's a UK radio station, a rock radio station, that have, with the permission of Tommy Vance's family, have AI regenerated. Basically,
Oh,
they've got a Tommy Vance. He's doing the the little links between whatever the show is. I'll always remember. I remember Wayne Harris telling me. We laughed about it at the time, listening to Tommy Vance, and his line on that occasion was, "Please come and join me in a goblet of April wine." April Wine being the band, you know what I mean? But it was just
yeah,
like, join me
yeah.
in drink a cup of April. But the way it was said, again, very very dramatic. Again, clearly, it was we were of an age as well when perhaps things like that would have had an impact. But I love the idea that he's effectively coming back. He's effectively coming back. I had a thought this morning also. I don't know whether this whole AI thing, because the new Beatles single that came out, I'm sure you will have heard it, but there's the technology that they're now able to plug into that, and I've heard other stuff where they've taken they can basically tell the system to record, I can't remember, do a Rolling Stones track, but using the Paul McCartney's voice circa 1972 or something, and it can literally
McCartney's
emulate.
on the new album, actually. McCartney's on the new Stones album.
Right. Have they got
And it's a punk track. I can't remember the name of it. It's a punk track. It's in the style of the Sex Pistols. You can't make this up.
I've avoided the album. I know how well it did, and every time I go into my local record shop, I'll give a little plug once again for David's music.
Don't be put off by Angry. Don't be put off by Angry.
What's
the title track?
Right.
Angry's the first track. I say this to so many people. Don't be put off by your introduction. I prefer to listen to an album start to finish.
Yes.
I guess that's why I love concept albums so much. But I do like something I can sit down and listen from start to finish. Which has taken me in some terrible directions, Mark.
I was going to say, best concept album then?
Best concept album. There's been some discussion about this, but I think for me, the best concept album was a toss-up between Quadrophenia and The Wall, and I've gone for The Wall. Not because it's Pink Floyd, not because I'm a Floyd fan.
Right.
But I think that was a masterpiece, in my opinion. The Wall was a masterpiece.
Yeah.
Start to finish. It's got everything in it. Look,
I was thinking of watching the film again recently. I haven't seen it for 30 years, maybe. I don't know whether you've gone back and watched the movie of The Wall. Would you recommend it?
Well, Alan Parker produced the movie. There was a hell of a lot of... I've got a story to tell you. Right. There was a hell of a lot of controversy at the time. And it was around the time when Waters was breaking up with Pink Floyd, when the movie was made. Now, I don't know if you've heard the story, but some of us actually got to meet Roger Waters and go to a recording session.
Yeah, yes. So
the story is this: I was doing my apprenticeship, and I was getting near the end of the apprenticeship, and I'd been offered a job in Oxford, and it was Friday night at the end of a shift, and we were talking, and there was a guy there called Mark Grayson. So Mark was talking to somebody and said, "I can't come tomorrow. I'm recording with Pink Floyd." So I thought, what is a mechanical fitter at Prestdale Fisher in Llanelli doing recording with Pink Floyd? So I scratched the surface and found out that Mark was with the Pontardulais Male Voice Choir.
Right.
So he said, "We're recording tomorrow with Pink Floyd at Pontardulais Infant School." So first of all, I was in disbelief, as you can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
The following morning, I was the first person outside that school.
You were there, yeah.
I was sitting there in my van. My sister came with me, believe it or not. I was sitting in my van outside the school, and there was a Britannia Row recording studio. mobile recording studio in the playground with
Yes.
cables going out into the school, and nobody was there. The doors were open, but there was nobody about, no caretakers or anything.
Mhm.
So I'm sitting there staring out of the window, and what comes up the road was this huge SL 300 blue Mercedes. And at the wheel is Roger Waters, and next to him is Michael Kamen. Michael Kamen has got,
Who's that?
he was one of the producers.
Right. Okay.
He did the orchestral stuff on the
Gotcha.
wall. So I'll never forget the sight. So Roger got out of the car. He parked in the car park. He got out and he's looking around and he's trying to get into the recording trailer and he can't get in. So he looks confused. So I get up, I walk across the playground and say, "Hi, Roger. I think they've all disappeared. The last time I heard, they'd gone up the pub because there'd been a crowd of people there and they'd left."
Right.
So he said, "Oh, that sounds like a good idea. Where are they?" And I said, "Well, they're probably up at, what was that pub in the corner on Pentra Road?" And anyway, I can't remember the name of it, but I
Wasn't the
said they're
Delice
probably.
Glen, was it? No, I don't know that one. There's a big pub in
So,
Pontardulais.
so I had my first conversation with Roger Waters, and he
Bizarre.
said, I think there's music in there. Is there anybody in there?" And I said, "No." I said, "They've all gone. They locked it up." And I said, "There's nobody around." He said, "Oh, okay." Michael Kamen got out. He had a black trilby hat on. He had this brown leather jacket down to his ankles, and he had a scarf around his neck that was piano keyboards, silk
All right.
scarf and piano keyboards around his neck.
I'm a
So
musician.
I had a look. I had a look through the window of the Merc, and Waters had a Rolling Stones Sticky Fingers cassette there that they'd been playing, and I knew they'd been playing it because he hadn't put it back in the case.
Fantastic. A lot of people turned up. Were you the person? Because I think
Yeah,
I've
I
seen
told him. Yeah,
photographs. Yeah.
I told everybody. I told everybody I could, everybody I knew at the time. And
Yeah. Rob
what
Lewis
happened?
went. I know Rob Lewis was there, and I think Hedges, a few of the guys from Pontardulais. There was, there was a number that turned up there. So, but
So
it's
Mark, my brother-in-law, he turned up, and the bastard had a copy of The Wall, and Roger signed it. I didn't have any Pink Floyd albums. I was frightened to leave in case he left. I was frightened to go home to sign them and get some albums from him signed. But I did get to talk to him a few times. So
yes,
anyway, what happened then was, I don't know if you remember our history teacher, John Walters. He was in the choir
yes.
as well. He arrived, and a few of the people. And Noel Davis was the leader of the choir in
So was
Pontardulais.
this for the recording for the album, or was this for the movie?
Right. Now then, it was for the movie.
Yeah.
However, and it's not documented, but I was there, so I'm convinced I heard it. Roger Waters' first solo album, Radio Waves, there's a track on there called "The Tide Is Turning."
Yes, I know it. Yes,
And
good
if you
album.
listen to that track, there's
Radio
a Welsh
Chaos, the
choir.
album is, I think. Is it Radio Chaos? Is that it?
Radio Chaos.
Yeah,
Radio Chaos, that's right. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Radio Waves was the first track. So Radio Chaos, there's a track on there called "The Tide Is Turning."
Yes.
Open brackets, after Live Aid, close brackets, if my memory serves me correctly.
Right.
You can hear in the background a Welsh choir singing,
Oh, the tide is turning. That's right. You're right.
Right? I'm convinced that I was there when they recorded that.
Right.
So we got to be careful here. Whether or not Roger had permission to do it, I don't know, because it was the film recording sessions. But I'm convinced to this day that I heard them record that.
And that album also, isn't it a lot of miners' strike stuff around it as well, isn't it? Because there's a lot of spoken word and right.
It revolves around Billy, and there was a lot of stuff going on at the time in Britain. A lot of tragic stuff. When I moved up to Oxford, it was a bit like Disneyland for me.
Yes. Yes.
Because I'd come from a depressed area and there were very few jobs there, and I'd left the Press Steel Fisher plant in Llanelli, finished my apprenticeship, and I had a future that a lot of those guys didn't have.
Yes, but you had to move.
Um,
You had to move
I had
to
to
the
move. I had
proximity
to
of where
leave.
the opportunity was.
I would go back to the beginning again. I had to escape, you know, and it's something I did. I don't regret it. And I met so many people and I did such wonderful things up there that I enjoyed. And I had a lot of opportunities I basically wouldn't have had in Gorsignan, as I'm sure you have.
There were no opportunities there. Is the way I looked at it. I worked in a music shop. I enjoyed myself there, but I was earning peanuts, and I thought I'd seen salesmen come in, people from musical instrument companies, people from Yamaha and so on, and I thought I could do what they're doing, but to try and get a job as a sales rep, I managed to get one interview in about 2 years. That's all I could get. But when I then made the decision, circumstances as they were, met my wife as she is now, we met again in Swansea back in 1985, although we'd originally met in the 70s, oddly enough, on holidays. But I came to London and I could come up one day a week. I could get 5 interviews in a day, and I could get 2 or 3 job offers in a day. And so as I said, I can see also what you mean by that is also similar, going from a black and white, mundane, dualistic world, which was Swansea, whereas for us, circa mid 1970s or 80s. You cross the border. You went to Oxford. I ended up in London, and opportunity. You could say I said the streets were paved with gold. I turned Tory overnight. Do you know what I mean? It's like I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The world outside that bubble that we'd been in was very different. It's a bit. I'm thinking now. It's a bit like the Matrix. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of.
So I guess my life was going in 2 directions. My dad said, "Well, if you're not going to go to university, at minimum you need to get a trade." And I was
Right.
lucky enough to get an electrical trade, but it wasn't my true love. I started working as a disc jockey. There was a club at the time called the Hollywood Inn,
Know it
which
well.
used to be known as Jack Mason's
Jackie
originally.
Masons, yeah.
And in the old days, back in the 60s and 70s, that was quite a big club. They had some big names playing there.
Right.
So my girlfriend at the time, I was at her house and the phone went. And there was somebody on the other end of the phone and they said, "Look, we heard your boyfriend wants to be a disc jockey. Our disc jockey hasn't turned up tonight. Would he like to work?" So it was Kay at the time, Kay Wood. So she said, "I'll have a word." So she had a word and she said, there's a job going if you want it tonight as a
Opportunity
disc
is just
jockey.
knocking.
Okay. So I said, okay. So I went along and I worked that night with their records, which were hopeless. And at the time, I'd started accumulating a reasonable record collection. So, so I worked there, I think it would have been for about a year and a half to 2 years. And then I had my own mobile DJing show. So I used to play clubs in some around Swansea, some in Gorsignan. And I started building quite a collection of music together. For me, it was sharing the music I had with people. My dad said to me, "Why are you doing this? You're not making any money." Every penny I made went back into my music collection, Mark.
Or into the sound system or lighting or whatever it is that you needed to buy.
Yeah, exactly. Or equipment. And it was quite interesting because I met a lot of friends and I had a lot of musical influences at the time. But in Gorsignan, nothing much was happening. There was that progressive scene. There was a heavy rock scene. A lot of the people there from Llanelli were into heavy rock music, and they'd come down to Gorsignan and I'd be playing at the Bottom Hotel. They'd come down there and Gorsignan Hotel. And, I'd be working 3 nights a week and doing an apprenticeship and going to college at the same time.
Right.
Eventually, after you've burned the candle at both ends, it can't last forever. But when you're young, you don't realize that. You think you can get by on 3 hours sleep a night. So when my apprenticeship finished, it was made clear there were no jobs in Llanelli. and I was offered an interview up in Oxford.
Oh, well. With the same company,
So,
though, is it? Or is it still the same holding
yeah, it was
company?
Press Steel,
Right.
but
Okay.
then it was part of British Leyland, which became Austin Rover and then Rover
Yeah.
Cars,
Right.
and subsequently it's now owned by BMW. So I packed everything up, and it was St. David's Day, March the 1st, 1983,
Right.
that I left, and I moved up to Oxford, and we were in digs for a while. And they found out I was a disc jockey. So the social club at the work wanted me to do some gigs there, which I wasn't really keen on doing. So what they did, they offered to buy my equipment off me. So I sold my equipment, but I kept my records. So we used to hang out, the Welsh guys. We used to hang out on a Thursday night at this pub called the Corn Dolly in Oxford. It's right in the middle of Oxford, and it's a basement, archetypal. You see these. There's probably 1,000 of these in London. They're
Right.
basements,
Yeah. Right.
dives.
Yes.
Um, and we went there, and I started meeting people. This is odd. I know this person. I've seen them on TV. Um, so I was asked if I'd stand in for the disc jockey again on one particular night. So I worked there again for at least a year, and I worked with a lot of great guys. I worked with people like Bernie Marsden, Whitesnake,
Bernie Marsden.
Bernie
Oh,
Marsden.
wonderful. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We used to get clientele come in like Gary Moore and people like that would rock up.
Is it?
This was
Was it because
amazing.
it was a rock pub? Was it? You know what I mean? Was it? It was the
Yeah,
place then? Was it?
it was. It was the place, and all there were a lot of bands playing in Oxford at the time. This is pre-Radiohead. I never got to meet Radiohead,
Right.
but this is Oxford bands. Anybody who was anybody was playing at the Dolly. So then there was another pub in Oxford called the Penny Farthing, which was a rock venue.
Right.
So I soon got talking to the manager of the Penny Farthing, so I ended up having to work there as well some nights. So Peter Morgan, the guy who was the manager of the Penny Farthing, he invited me to work. So I ended up working with some amazing bands there. These were rock bands like Molly Hatchet, Larry Miller. Um, One night I'm talking to this girl, and I think she was trying to hit on me, to be honest. But anyway, it was, my name's Pauline. So I'm talking to Pauline for a while, and it turns out it was Ian Gillan's sister, Pauline Gillan.
Crazy.
So, so you would meet these people. So one of the funniest acts we had there was a guy called John Otway. Now I don't know
John
if you
Otway.
remember John Otway. So
I can
John
tell you,
Otway,
I met John Otway. I stood next to John Otway having a pee at a
yeah,
urinal in
yeah,
Potter's Bar, actually. He'd just been to see him play live, I would say 25 years ago. He was shit-faced, absolutely shit. Because bearing in mind, he was throwing himself off a set of step ladders at one point. There's some crazy part of his set where he'd climb up a set of steps and throw himself down. But I tried to kind of pass on my. It was a terrific show there, John. Terrific show, as he's got his head pressed up against the wall whilst he's taking
yeah.
his post-gig leak. So there was John Otway and Wild Willie Barrett. Really Free, I thought was a great song. That was a single that I
Well,
bought back in the day.
when Willie Barrett wasn't with him, he had a guy called Robin who went on to be a record producer.
Right?
So Robin used to be. There were only two of them on the stage, and he came on one night, and he's about 7 feet tall. John Otway's about 7 feet tall. And the thing is, when he comes in the room, he walks in the room and arms and legs go in different
Yes,
directions,
yes. He's
and,
like a
and, and
rake as
then
well, isn't he?
and then reassemble themselves at the other side of the room.
Right.
So you get a fully complete John Otway at the other side of the room.
It's like a stick man.
Yeah. So we were chatting, and he was quite a nice guy to talk to. But anyway, he two songs he sang which really stuck with me. One was called "The Middle of Winter." Okay. And it goes somewhere along the lines of, the night was dark and clear. There were stars all around. It was the middle of winter. And then Robin perks his little head up. Middle of winter. And that was the theme. But the second song, he does a version of Blockbuster by The Sweet.
All right. Well, I'd like
So
to
the
hear
penny
that.
farthing had quite a low ceiling. So he starts singing Blockbuster. Well, he doesn't sing it rather than speak it. So he disappears into the side and the crowd are going wild. I can't tell you all the comments. They wouldn't be fit to put on air.
Right.
But the next thing you see is a pair of legs coming across the stage with his feet on the ceiling. He's walking along the ceiling in winkle pickers. And he
Yes.
had those jesters winkle pickers, and you can't see him. And he's just walking along the ceiling. The guy was crackers. I think he ended up on a Halifax Building Society ad on the TV.
He may have. I think he spent all of his money. He was as I said, I saw him with a set of step ladders. Really Free was, and so he was a one-hit wonder in that sense. But I'm going to check. I can imagine him playing Blockbuster, because that is like a dank as a riff. So I'm going to be checking that out once we're finished. Now let's start kind of bringing things to a conclusion here on this. Something that I don't, with the other conversations we've had, not the first of the podcast series was with Ed Kenny. I don't think we touched upon it there, but when I spoke with Tanner originally and with Glenn Graham the other day, we've got on to funeral music. So perhaps we're of that age. We're beginning to attend more funerals than marriages nowadays. But have you ever considered or thought, or will music play a part in your funeral proceedings?
No, I thought you might mention this. So, no, I've had a good think about it. I've got my musical tastes change all the time, and I've got such a vast collection
Yes.
that it's hard to pick things out. And sometimes I'm listening to it and I think, oh, that'd be good. But there are two tracks. There's a Clapton album, 24 Nights at the Albert Hall.
Right.
Eric Clapton.
Right.
It's a live album. And on side 2, disc 2, track 4, Wonderful Tonight. Now then.
Right. There's a beautiful
Wonderful
song.
Tonight. It's a live version of Wonderful Tonight. Now the other one is from Magic Time, which is Van Morrison.
Oh.
And it's called Just Like Greta.
Right.
Have you heard that song?
No, I've not heard it. I'd say not hugely into Van
Just Like
Morrison.
Greta Garbo.
Right. Okay.
I had it here to show you, and I can't find it now.
I don't know. I would say they're two interesting and Wonderful Tonight. I know that song pretty well, actually.
It's very good. No, there are others. Just
right.
I found it.
Because me and Chris are basically making an agreement that we're going to go to each other's funeral to make sure that the music is played correctly. Right? I got it. Magic Time, Van Morrison.
Just Like Greta. It's an amazing song.
Right. That was bizarre. Then you just held up the CD screen, your CD to your screen, to your camera, and I could see myself reflected in the CD cover. I mean,
all the way from the Perth Hills.
It's just to say, you just pause for a moment. Do you know what? Are you sure there's a bit of a Stargate going on here then in that one? As I said, to see my face reflected back to me off a CD cover that was being held up in Perth, Australia, which is, I don't know, what is it, 8,500 miles away? What would that be? It must be the best part of 10,000 miles.
Nine,
that is extraordinary. Right, okay, lastly then, top albums. So let's say, can you pick like 3 LPs, 3 albums? They don't have to be number 1, number 2, number 3. It's not a desert island disc, but as you said, you change from time to time. This is not to be locked in stone, but what are if you had to kind of say years 3 great albums, what would you put into that mix?
Okay, I'm going to show you that one because that's an
surprise.
Okay,
That was Bruce
Um,
Springsteen, Born to Run. I remember first hearing that at Rob Lewis's house. I think Ray Lewis had a
al-
copy of it.
although my favorite Springsteen track outside of that album is probably Land of Hope and Dreams live.
Mm, right.
That's absolutely fantastic. Okay, this might be a bit predictable, but look, Animals Remastered
Yes.
2018 on
Yeah.
vinyl. It does sound different from the original, well worth getting.
I agree. I can't believe
And
that.
this
6 years
one,
ago. Was it 6? Oh, right. Because that's right. They did it 6 years ago, but they only released it 18 months ago, didn't they? They couldn't agree on the liner notes.
yeah.
I'm right about
Now
this, aren't I?
I was going to show you. I was going to show
Animals.
you an Eno David Byrne album called My Life in the Bush of Ghosts, but I'm not going
Yes,
to do
yes.
that
Right.
because if I was to pick an album that I play regularly
Yeah.
and love it every time I listen to it,
Yeah.
it's this one.
No.
It's by
Hanoi
Hanoi
Rocks.
Rocks and it's called Two Steps from the Move.
I don't think I've ever listened to Hanoi Rocks. I was put off by the hairdos.
Yeah. This
What's it called?
album, Two
Two Step.
Steps from the Move.
Because they're like more like the what are something dolls, the New York Dolls. They've got that look about them, haven't they? The kind of
Now then, there's a little story here. Axl Rose of Guns N' Roses once said he could never understand why Hanoi Rocks weren't bigger than Guns N' Roses. They should have been off. They should have been stratospheric. It was
wow,
unbelievable.
wow.
That album, produced by Bob Ezrin,
Oh,
who's worked with Alice Cooper and a few others.
yes, yeah. Well, and he
Um,
did the Wall.
he did The Wall as well. Yeah.
I only again during lockdown, I got into and I tell you why. Oddly enough, you mentioned Jordan Peterson the other day. Jordan Peterson, I saw him being interviewed. I think I think the interview was by guitarist for Alice Cooper at one point, and Jordan Peterson loved um, Welcome to My Nightmare. He said
Yeah.
that was from his youth. So I bought that as a consequence of it. I didn't really know the album, but I can hear on that there are parts because there is again I don't know whether I don't know whether there's maybe talking on it. There's it's kind of sets the scene, and I could see the similarities between that and The Wall. And again, I think that came out before The Wall. I think that was the first Bob Ezrin album with Pink Floyd, I think. But sorry, just to go back, you saying Bob Ezrin did that Hanoi Rocks album? I'm interested
Pretty sure. Just bear with me.
because, as you said, he did Alice Cooper. So it's not as if he was kind of against it, but as I said. The reason why Hanoi Rocks, I can pretty much answer the
Yeah.
question for he is he?
Remixed at Phase One by Ezrin, O'Brien, DeRose, and Ursina.
There we go. There
Ursina.
we go. Right. No, the reason
Bob
it's a brilliant,
Ezrin. Actually, he plays on it.
right, amazing.
He plays. He's playing keyboards, percussion, and vocals on some of the tracks.
Have you ever seen the movie, the documentary about Anvil?
Oh, it's about that rock band, heavy
Yes.
metal rock band.
Yeah. Have you ever seen it? It's a brilliant
I
film.
never saw it, but I've seen Anvil play live at the Reading Rock Festival.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Well, that was probably back in the day. Whether your Wrangler jacket made it out there alive, I don't know. But it's well worth seeing the movie. But on that, you also have guys from Anthrax and Metallica who were peers of Anvil at the time. And I think it's the drummer from Metallica who's a very smart, switched on, savvy music industry guy, not just a drummer. But because he's kind of said Anvil could have gone, as far as they have. But what's the difference? It's such a complex business. It may have been down to just the wrong management, maybe the wrong record company. You had to get so many things lined up, and it all just had to be right at the right time. That in some respects you've got to wonder as to whether a large dose of it is just down to luck more than anything else. There must be so many brilliant artists and bands that we never got to hear because they didn't get signed or weren't promoted by the right record company
Well,
or so
the
on.
biggest disappointment, as far as didn't make it to me, which is now one of my favorite bands and has been for quite some time, is Porcupine Tree. Stephen Wilson
Right.
and Porcupine Tree,
Yeah.
to me, are part of my core listening.
Are they? Right. He's
Um,
big news over here. I probably although you're living out there, it strikes me that I don't know. Are you locked into the Australian? Are Porcupine Tree big in Australia? Because they're big in the UK.
oh,
Porcupine Tree.
yeah, well, they weren't big over here, and I don't even think they were that big in Britain. But the problem is it's expensive, okay? Because what happens is this: I take a punt and I buy this album, which has had the biggest effect on me since Dark Side of the Moon.
And that's a
And this,
Porcupine Tree album, is it?
no, this is Stephen Wilson, and it's called Hand Cannot Erase.
Right. Okay.
Okay. It's a work of art. It's absolutely superb. The production is amazing. The musicianship is brilliant. The album before that, which is called The Raven That Refused to Talk.
Yeah, I heard some of that.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. Porcupine Tree. Now, the problem was when I heard that Hand Cannot Erase, I started listening to Stephen Wilson and buying all his music. Now, the
Right.
problem is he's been producing music since 1994.
Yeah.
Whereas in
He's
the
a
old days,
producer.
a band brought an album out. A band brought an album out and we'd buy it. Now, a band brings an album out and I'm trying to buy their back catalogue. I think I've got about 12 of his albums.
Yeah, he also
Porcupine Tree.
does. He also does kind of remixes. So he done a lot of Jethro Tull
Yeah.
remixes. He'll have
Yes.
done, their 40th anniversary of this album, 50th anniversary of whatever else. He's a very, very busy, obsessive producer who can use all of the modern state-of-the-art technology. But he also, because I think Chris Tanner sent me links to the one we mentioned about a raven there. I listened to some of that, and it's just like, well, I would say Stephen, he's like an AI. He's like an artificial intelligence throwing together. It's like I could hear, I go, oh, there's a bit of Camel there. Oh, that's all those harmonies. Oh, that's yes. Oh, bit of Crosby, Stills and Nash coming in there. It's he is able to bring all of those things together. So yeah, impressive. I saw Porcupine Tree, I would say, I don't know, 15, 18 years ago, something along those lines. And Tanner was trying to get me to go and see them maybe last year in London. Him, Spike, and Philip Harris came up. They went to see him. I didn't go.
That's a great album with a great DVD. It's called Anaesthetize Live in Tilburg. And that's the CD and concert.
All right. Well, look, we're going to leave it there, Mr. Nutt. I think we've done an hour and 47 on the. So this is the longest podcast I've done yet. Appreciate the time and the interest you've shown, and I think, as I said, we spoke the other day in advance of this, but you've clearly been I hope you've been thinking about it as well. You've been kind of going through the back catalogue in your mind, and we've probably only touched upon no more than 5% of it, if you think about it, even of
tip of the iceberg, Mark. Tip of the iceberg.
Correct. But the attempt was to try, said, and get an appreciation, said, for your musical obsessions. There is a lot of crossover, I think, as there would be for any of us of a certain age from Gorsinan. Anyone who came into contact with this, what did he call the star? What did he call it? The star. What was Andrew Demery again? What's that phrase?
Portal.
Yeah,
portal. It was a Stargate.
Another word. A Stargate. Andrew Stargate Demery. Any of it? So we all. I said there's a Venn diagram there, and it said in the middle of it is Pink Floyd, Zappa, Weather Report, Deep Purple. I would say as well. Not so much. You know what I mean? There's that classic kind of stuff, and then we've kind of on the outer edges of that is Jean-Luc Ponty, which we've covered. I'm not sure that even as the podcast continues into the future, as to whether we're going to get, as you say, such an eclectic taste as to go from dusty Springfield to Hanoi Rocks, whilst at the same time choosing to bookend your life with Eric Clapton and Wonderful Tonight. I mean, that is totally unique, one and only. And as I said, listen, thanks ever so much I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm sure our listeners, as well as myself, will have enjoyed it too. Let's do it again sometime, hey?
Love it, Mark. Love to do it
and
again.
You know what I'd
It's
like
been
to do
emotional.
now? It has. And you know what I'd like to do now? But the bastards on YouTube won't allow it. I'd like us to finish now with the theme tune to Tommy Vance rock show, kind of fade out.